So there are some people online like Varg who almost make a living off of criticizing civilization. And, I kind of sympathize, but I take a more monastic approach, right? I don't think we're ever going to be able to force people to live a certain way. I think eventually the thing will collapse upon itself. But I don't think we're going to be able to stop people from wanting to live this way, because it's the easiest possible thing that they can do, and that's what most people try to do. If you want to say that there's some kind of historical determinism, then this would be it, is that people, because of our biology or whatever, seek to avoid pain. If they have a choice not to suffer, they're going to take it. And I think anyone would, to be honest, even myself. Say, for instance, now, not necessarily for myself. If I was dying of cancer or something, I've already made up my mind quite a while ago that I would just allow myself to die, essentially, if that was the way it was going. But if my child was in that situation, I'm not going to make that kind of decision for them. Of course, I'm going to do whatever I could to make sure that they live. And, that's a normal human impulse, right? And that's what actually brings us to modern civilization, is that desire to live. And we do that. In order to do that, we develop all of these kinds of technologies. Now, of course, we don't have to be living in the same sort of way that we do, but that's another topic altogether. Anyway, the problem with people like Varg and others is that they then, for some reason, they associate the problems of our present society with Christianity. And want to say, Christianity teaches weakness, and Christianity destroyed our original Western culture. Not true. Your own ancestors did that. The ancestors that you basically pray to did that. And no one forced them to do it in most cases. There are some cases where people were made to convert or whatever, but that was not the general trend. The general trend was willing conversion. Why? Probably because Christianity is simply actually more advanced than the types of paganism that existed at that time. Theologically, it's more consistent, and that's why it didn't spread among the stupid, weak people first, as some people put forward, that people who wanted to reach out an easier lifestyle or whatever. No, it spread amongst the elite and the literate elite first, long before it ever spread to the common people. These people, the warrior elite, adopted Christianity. And you have to remember also that Christianity was almost had an anti-elitist sentiment, at least compared to what existed previously. And for these people to adopt it, where they're expected then to care for other people or take some sort of provisions for the well-being of others, that's a big move. Why would they do it? It didn't serve their interest. Their interests were better served by preserving the old system. Well, I contend that, the radical contention that they actually believed it, and that's why they adopted it. Yes, our culture did change over time, but it didn't change as radically as some of these people want to think. Not until the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And the changes for that were set in the late Middle Ages, and the rise of Protestantism and capitalism. If you want to look for the origin of the death of Western civilization and the death of culture, that's where you ought to look. Okay? Most serious traditionalist theologians are anti-modernists, and they recognize that there's been a lot of bad things that have come along with the technological advance, and most of them don't know, they don't have any answers as to what to do about it, but they don't like it. And most of them are in the camp that they wish they could turn the clocks back too. But people like Varg and others, people who espouse paganism, just don't want to admit that their ancestors were Christians by their own volition, and they had many good reasons to be Christians, and furthermore that Christianity is simply not what they think it is. They think it's weak, and yet Europe was one of the most violent and militarily strong places when it was devoutly Christian. Secondly, the values are not radically different, and they're not specifically Jewish. The 10 Commandments could be applied to any civilization or any cultural group in the world and be completely relevant, because they just express a natural sentiment in human cultures. When you get people living together, it's like a basic way of how to act so that you bring about a good outcome. Don't go killing people. Don't go stealing people's wives. It's pretty simple stuff. And the idea of Jesus is certainly not, sometimes he's portrayed as some sort of hippie or someone who never thought that defending oneself was a good idea or something. No, that's not what he really is about. It's really about expressing the possibility that anyone can be redeemed, that anyone can, truly love, and that is sort of the highest ideal. Because you don't feel like a good person, and you don't feel like a spiritually awakened person when you're angry. That's the reality of it. I know I have to deal with anger all the time. This page is called, Raging Celt for a reason. And if you let that anger take over you, it doesn't put you in a good place, and it leads to bad outcomes. So if you want to live in any group of people, it's not specifically about a civilization. If you wanted to live in a band of 20 people, and if you wanted the best way to act, to get along with those people, to create a functional community, what would be a better way to act? Go around smashing people in the face whenever they disagree with you? Or to act in the example of Jesus? It's that simple. Has nothing to do with Judaism. It's just a human truth. But to love thy neighbor as thyself, first you have to love yourself. And that means preserving your own culture, your own identity. It doesn't mean destroy yourself to give to the other. That's the sort of common misconception. That's why they think, oh, Jesus is a wimp, right? And he wants to destroy the individual or something. Christianity is built on individualism. It's the individual's responsibility to act in accordance with God's will. And of course, I'm a big fan of Pelagius, so I'm a heretic, but I think that it is entirely up to you to align with the will of God, and it's not, it's not enough just to say, oh, forgive me, and then bang, you're a changed person. No, it's really about your actions and what you do in this life. And so I just really don't see why some of these paganistic individuals have such a hatred for Christianity, because they're just hating on their own ancestors. For 2,000 years, the majority of the West has been Christian, or at least 1,500 years. I just think that a lot of their hatred is because of the Jewish problem, or question, or whatever you want to call it. But just step back from that for a moment, because Christian theology, in its deepest sense, has nothing to do actually with Judaism. It's to do with the nature of God, and how do we understand God? What is the history of God's intervention on earth? And the original Christian theologians would tell you that God worked through every religion. All the pagans did have an understanding of God, just not as high an understanding as we have now. And all of the pagan gods were in fact an expression of the real God, but just not on a high enough level, not on a higher level understanding. And in fact, many early Christians believed that pagans could go to heaven, because as long as they act in accordance with the will of God, that it didn't matter that they didn't know or understand Christianity, because in many cases they couldn't have. It mattered about what they understood and what they believed and how they acted. Now, the civilization that these people hate, and that I also despise, was born in the dying end of the late medieval period, with the rise of Protestantism as one example, and the birth of capitalism. This is the trend that led to the destruction of our culture. It is not the fault of Christians. If anything, during the Christian period, in the early and high Middle Ages, we had a very vibrant culture. You look at any of the historical writings from those times, or the many ancient legends and poetry and stuff recorded during those times by dedicated Christian monks in most cases. Don't forget, everything you know about your beloved paganism comes from these people, from these times, where you say that Christians were brutally suppressing pagans. Yet, at the same time, we're writing down all of their stuff. So this frustrates me, especially being as this is Christmas Day. And, I just happened upon one of these videos. And, most of his videos are great, but just this hatred for Christianity, and this conflating Christianity with Judaism. Be a pagan. That's fine. Perfectly fine. But know what you believe. And don't spread lies about history. And understand that, you can't just scapegoat the Roman Empire or some other, brutal leader and claim that they are the reason that, culture is dead and that our ancestors adopted Christianity, because it isn't true. I mean, hell, the Greeks maintained their Christian identity after hundreds of years of Ottoman occupation, Muslim rule. There are Christians still in the Middle East, even after being slaughtered, many, many times, and living for many, many hundreds or thousands or over 1,000 years under Islamic rule, often very oppressive Islamic rule, and they're still going. So if people really want to hold a faith, they can do it, even in very adverse situations, even when it's completely outlawed, because it's pretty hard to outlaw ideas. Many of the people who participate in the church are active in their communities, trying to preserve a semblance of culture. Okay? Actually, at this point, the church is the only functional center of culture in the Western world. And that's why our culture is in such decline. And for all the whining of pagans, they don't do anything. I mean, Varg even is too cowardly to try to set up a pagan community because he says, oh, the state will crack down on us. Yet there are tons of various communities of religious and non-religious sorts all around the world, and sometimes the state does suppress them in some cases, but they're still going and they still are making an effort, whereas Varg just likes to whine about things. I mean, heck, you can think what you want about the Mormons, but some of their radical groups have whole very large communities, right, where they practice polygamy and stuff in violation of most states' laws. In Canada, in British Columbia, we have Bountiful. It's a Mormon village where they practice polygamy, and in open violation of Canadian law. But because there's so many of them, that the state doesn't crack down on them. Well, they did crack down on them. They tried to get them on some sort of child abuse thing or whatever. I don't know whatever happened to that. But anyway, they still function as a community. So if they can do it, why couldn't Varg do it? Why can't we do it? No, I'm not talking about being Mormon, but I'm talking about just the idea of having your own internal community. That's something completely apart from mainstream society. It is entirely possible. And the fact that Varg makes excuses and rejects it as being an impossibility just actually shows where his real interest lies. There's in Ottawa here, we got a kooky Druid grove, and I love, the history of Druidism and all of this. I couldn't attend this grove because they're a bunch of kooks. They make no sense. Their ceremonies are ridiculous. Why would I attend? Believe me, I wish I could. But it's, they're pretending to be something. That's really what it is. They don't believe this stuff themselves. They're faking it. And you can tell it because you watch their stuff and there's no sincerity to it. They're trying to recreate something that they don't know what it really is, which they shouldn't do. They should just create all new stuff, but they don't. And then they don't believe it. They don't really believe it. You can tell them when they're kind of half smiling, half laughing when they're reading out their little sermons or their version of it. It's silly. And then most of the time they don't even know what they're talking about because they still associate the stone circles with Druidism and still persist in saying, oh, the Celts built all these Stonehenge and all this stuff. This is just childish. I don't know. It's tough for me. It's tough. This kind of misdirected hate. If they can't understand something as simple as the church and Christianity not being responsible for the modern world and modern civilization, I really don't understand. Most everybody complains about the church having brought dark ages to Europe, right? Destroyed civilization, which the secularists had to claw their inch by inch away from the church. And by the late Middle Ages, that had occurred. The church had become home even to secularists. And the early scientists emerging from the church were very much secularists and deists. And it were these people who made these radical changes that shaped our present society. And the church, I think rightly so, is recognized very commonly by liberals especially as being the main force that pushed against that and eventually lost. And now, of course, many churches around the world are trying to catch up with the modern age because they're afraid of being left behind because they're losing so many members. But instead of doing what they ought to do, which is radicalizing and becoming more entrenched in the tradition and orthodoxy, they're abandoning that and trying to appeal to the modern culture. So you see a lot of churches, even the Anglican Church in Canada, for instance, ordains gays and lesbians now. Of course, gay marriage is perfectly fine. And yeah, it's very bizarre. And of course, ordination of women and all that. And this is all in an attempt to, keep in step with modern society. And those churches are failing just as fast as the ones that aren't doing that, or perhaps even faster, in fact. But they're still one of the most hated targets, even though many of them are trying these pitiful attempts to reconcile themselves. They're still very much hated by the left and whatever secularists, atheists, etc. Anyway, so I'll throw out this challenge. What is it about Christianity, the actual theology, do you think creates the modern society? And that you think paganism would not have the same effect? Or what is it fundamentally that differentiates paganism in this regard as opposed to Christianity? Anyway, that's it for this Christmas Day late night special. I hope that you got something out of this rant and that you like and subscribe. And as always, stand tall.